derech of learning, how you should learn, what types of things you should learn. Let me just find what, 1 second. Yeah, this is Perek Ches. Yeah, the last point that he made, which was Sif Dalet, is actually a very interesting point, that a Chacham gets pleasure in his learning even while he does not yet fully understand it and hasn't finished anything. He mentions a Kasil, a foolish person, is always thinking about finishing. I want to finish, I want to finish, I want to cover ground. Masha'en Kain, a Chacham, is nana in the process itself. So it's an interesting psychological point, because on one hand, a person should have goals. I want to finish a Masechta, that's a big motivator. On the other hand, we have to not get overly connected to the notion of a particular goal. The pasuk that you're learning, the Gemara that you're learning, the Mishnah that you're learning. This is my accomplishment right now. I don't have to. This is a common problem with chavrusas. Often you'll have a chavrusa, I want to go weiter, I want to go weiter, I want to cover ground. But that's actually a mistake. In other words, in the short term, it looks like you're covering something, but in the long term, you're not really getting it. So on the other hand, I already spoke by Riechas that you shouldn't kvetch around. In other words, you should move at a reasonable pace, but don't move until you have a good basic pshat in things. Don't try to cut corners by just going ahead. And therefore, that's what the Gra says, that a Chacham is nana even when his knowledge is incomplete, because he knows that if he keeps on learning and connects the dots, he will eventually come to a good place. The Kasil is always in a rush. I think there's a saying among military surgeons, when you have to do these surgeries under warfare conditions. So they say if you have to repair an artery, the saying was, you can do it in 2 minutes if you don't rush. If you do rush, you're going to mess up. Hey, take your time, you can do it in 2 minutes. Learning is very much that way as well, meaning don't rush yourself. There's kind of a natural rhythm, a natural pace. You understand Pshat? It won't necessarily take that long, but don't rush yourself until you have a basic Havana, and then you go weiter, and don't be so attuned to the notion, I got to finish. So that was the last thing that the Gra said. Now the next thing is Sifhei. Again, this is a likut from different places. Mi sha'emer pshatim udrushim mefuarim she'enam lamita shel Torah b'chdei lehispayar onsho gadol miyod. So this is actually a very stark bit of Musar, stark bit of Teichacha. Sometimes a person wants to say a beautiful idea. So they read it into a pasuk, they read it into a medrash, they read it into a chazal. But it's not really what chazal meant to say, and it's not really what the medrash meant to say, but it's kind of your idea that you're going to force into the Maimer Chazal. So the Gra says that's a great Aveira, and there's a tremendous Einesh for a person who uses Torah and Chazal to advance their own ideas. Now the truth of the matter is, this is actually an extremely common problem that almost every person who says drushes faces in some level. Like you have such a nice idea that you want to force it into the words, even if that's not what the Maimer Chazal is saying. In fact, this could, I'm not sure, it could be the Gra is maybe criticizing Hasidic Vertlach, because Hasidic thought often goes in that direction, and we know that the Gra had a certain hisnagdus to Hasidus. This may in fact be connected to that. But the Gra says, in fact the Maral said it much earlier. The Maral was 200 years before the Gra. The Maral said, listen, if you have a nice idea that happens to be nice, then say it. Just say your nice idea. You don't have to force it into a text which is not talking about your idea. In other words, if it's worthwhile, then say it. course, that sounds a little funny. I mean, who's going to say, I have an idea about Avodas Hashem. I don't have any pasuk, I don't have any Maimer Chazal. People might stop listening. Well, who cares what your idea is, But still, the Maharal actually said, don't connect your machshava to a place where it doesn't belong. Because what you're doing is you're distorting the Torah to advance your particular thought. And the Gra is saying the same thing, that even if the drashos are mefuarim, they're beautiful, but they're not the pshat of what is being said, you get a big einish because that's kind of a forgery of the Torah. Okay, so that's a short thought. And again, some of these are relatively short. Then in Sifav, Kamo sha'aschayra shi'ata b'zayil, Taiv liknaisa sheseifa liyisyaker. Right? One of the main rules of business, they asked actually a famous, happened to be Jewish, but a famous financier in the 30s, 40s, 50s, Bernard Baruch, right? The schools are named after him and the like. They say, how do you become rich in business? How do you become successful in business? He says, the rule of business is buy low and sell high. That's all you need to know. The problem is, when do you know it's low, when do you know, etc. But the Yesod HaDvarim is, if you buy at a lower price than you sell, you're going to be matzliach. So the Gra says, in business it's a davar pashut, that you look for bargains, you look for merchandise that nobody wants at a particular time, and you buy it at a low price because nobody wants it, and then, if you have chachma, you can figure out it's going to go up, and you can then sell it at a high price. So the Gra says, by Torah, we have a similar type of mashal. Look for things that other people are neglecting. There are halakim of Torah that nobody pays attention to. It's cheap in the sense that nobody is going after it, and you can learn it, you could be ma'ayin in it, and eventually people are going to want to buy it from you because people will look to you to become a teacher. So there are many, many mitzayas in Torah that are very, very neglected. I mean, a very simple example is Seder Tyrus was neglected for many, many years, maybe many centuries. Now, a few people were Isaac and Tyrus. I mean, the Chazon Ish, other people were Isaac and Tyrus. And now, Baruch Hashem, if you look at new Svarim, you would see a surprising number of Svarim are written on Seder Tyrus. All sorts of inyanim. Now, the Sefer Hasidim says a little differently. Sefer Hasidim says that a Maseches that people don't learn is like a meis mitzvah. Right? If you find a body and nobody is going to bury the body, there are no relatives, so you have a mitzvah to bury it. There's a special mitzvah to bury, a meis mitzvah. Even a Kohen Gadol, even a Nazir. And if you're a Nazir who is a Kohen Gadol, you're metameh lemeis mitzvah. So Sefer Hasidim say that there are parts of the Torah that are like a meis mitzvah. Everybody neglects. Nobody learns. You should chaperein. And al pi Kabbalah, it's explained also a little differently than that as well. Hashem puts a certain measure of siyata dishmaya in the world for each chelik of Torah. I'm going to make up numbers. The numbers are meaningless. So let's assume that Hashem allocates, 30 tons of siyata dishmaya for Seder Moed and 30 tons of siyata dishmaya for Seder Tyrus. So if I learn Seder Moed that everybody else is learning, so you got to divide the 30 tons among hundreds of thousands of people. But with Seder Tyrus, I kind of get all of it myself because there aren't that many other people. So there is an actual concept that you get more siyata dishmaya as an individual from the mitzayas of Torah that are learned less, precisely because there are fewer people upon which that siyata dishmaya is going to be spread. And therefore the Gra says one should try to identify chalokim in Torah that are often neglected, often ignored, because they are especially precious, and just like merchandise, you buy it for cheap because no one else is looking for it. Eventually you will be able to sell it to others at a very high price. We don't mean for money, but we mean in terms of the ruchnius and the like that people will seek that Torah eventually. And again, I think, we've seen it a lot. We've seen it in the Inyanim of Seder Tyrus, as I said. We've seen it in the Inyanim of Kabbalah. And even Tanakh. Tanakh was ignored in the yeshiva world for centuries, really for centuries. And Baruch Hashem, in recent generations, just recent years, there are more and more Sfarim, people who had learned Tanakh, are now writing Chidushim on Tanakh that other people are benefiting from. Okay. Now, Sif Zayin, and this is something that maybe is going to be a little difficult. The Gra says, now where's this from? This is from Mishlei, Toiv li Adam sheyilmad ma'at v'chayzer tamid v'yeda kol davar al boryai mima sheyilmad v'yikba itzharbe v'eina yodea hadin al boryai. So what is the Gra saying? It is better to learn a little and chazer it over and over and over again till you know it well, than to learn a lot and by not being able to chazer it, you don't really have clarity. Now, I'm going to show you, I think there's some steers here. I mean, the problem is the Gra seems to say something different in another place. But here he says, it's more important to know and understand what you're learning, even if that means you're learning less, than to learn a lot where you don't understand. Now, first of all, it's very clear he is not endorsing what we call Ian. I mean, a person might say, so that's what the Gra is saying. So it's good to kvetch on a blat for a month. He's not really referring to that because that would indeed contradict what he said before. But what he's saying is that to daven things up and not understand Pshat, he says it's better to learn less and understand it than to learn a lot and not understand it. But at the same time, he said before that one needs to master Pshat, and one learns Bavli, Yerushalmi, Tosefta, Mechilta, Sifra, Sifri, all of these inyanim. So it seems that the Gra's ideal limud, I mean, I'm putting modern names on it, is not what we call Ian, and it's not what we call Bekias, because the Bekias is too superficial and quick, and the Ian is just taking too long, and you're not really covering things. But it is what is called, this is a new term in the yeshiva world, but it's become relatively popular, at least in America maybe, that's called Ian Kal. Ian Kal means light Ian. What is light Ian? So light Ian does not mean that you learn all the Rishonim, but you take, one or two things. I mean, you take, Rashi, of course, Taisvas, and maybe one other thing, maybe Ramban or Ran. Ran is actually very good. And, you learn it, and you chazer it, and you have a basic pshat. And you don't spend that much with achronim, bichlal. And an Ian Kal accommodates both goals at the same time. The Ian Kal allows you to chazer a lot and to understand what's going on. And the Ian Kal also allows you to cover ground in a reasonable way, as opposed to a blot every month. I remember when I was in Eretz Yisrael, so I was in a shir, again, a very chashuv Talmid Chacham, who Baruch Hashem is still around, and Baruch Hashem, one of the great Gedolim in America. So I'm not going to mention by name because this is a little bit of a negative story. So I had him as a high school Rebbe, like his first year of teaching. This was many years ago. Now he's already kind of a Gadol. But he was like, a young Rebbe, like 27. And he was really a Baal Pilpul. He was and is a brilliant person. And he would be mafavol. He could take a single point and break it down to 100 steps. I mean, I still have this vision. I have no memory at all of what he was saying. But he wrote like 100 steps on the blackboard. And towards the end, it read something like this. In Hebrew, According to the Kasha of Islamed Beis, we have a teretz to the 3 questions that were asked in Ice Tzaddik Beis. It's just a bunch of numbers. Step 100 is the answer, step 37, etc. And he would write intricate pilpulim. I mean, we were like, 10th graders. And we're hearing all of this complicated stuff. As a result, from Sukkot to Chanukah, we learned like one Amud. I don't know what the base medrash pace is. I imagine you're probably faster, but Sukkot to Chanukah, one Amud. So the Rosh Hashiva, Rav Yaakov Ritterman, came in to give us a test. And he asked the Rebbe, how much was covered. So the Rosh Hashiva thought it would be 20 blot, 30 blot, 40 blot. And said, that was the difference. But when he told him one Amud, the Rosh Hashiva just walked out. He was so infuriated that he just walked out. He said he couldn't, Baruch Hashem, he didn't fire the Rebbe on the spot, and the Rebbe became a great gadol, a great posek. But that was it, that the pilpul was so overwhelming. And then I think to myself, what did you gain as a 10th grader with all of that? I certainly I don't remember a single thing of that, of any of that. So the Gra was misnageh to that, and the Maharal, once again, was misnageh to that. That when we say, better to learn a little that you understand, that doesn't mean with all of the pilpul, because pumpakert, a lot of the pilpul confuses us. It's not that we understand something better the more we look at different things. It's the other way around. Sometimes we understand less. So one shouldn't confuse things. The fact that the Gemara says better to learn a little, chazer it and understand it, is not an endorsement of what you call yeshivish or full-fledged diyah, particularly for younger people. Okay. But once again, the point is to be clear. And I think the Gemara made the point earlier that even when there are things you don't know, you try to be clear about what you don't know. Because there are 2 types of lack of clarity. There is a lack of clarity in which I'm just confused and mixed up. And then there's a lack of clarity where I have a very specific question that I don't understand. Now that's a lack of clarity that has clarity. In other words, I can leave the sugya and I can say to myself, okay, I know A, B, C, and D. I have a problem with E. So write that down and then you can go weiter. But when a problem is so all-encompassing that you're all just mixed up, you can't leave. Don't leave it yet. In other words, you got to know what it is that you don't know. Because when you know what it is you don't know, you get to know what it is you do know. See, that's very important. Because that's actually a very pleasant surprise. Sometimes you're all confused. But if you can untangle the knot, you will find that you know a lot more than you think you know. That's a good feeling, actually. Because it's not that I don't know anything. It's that I don't know the raya that Tosos brings in his kasha. Okay, I'll think about that. Once I know that, that can be in the back of my head. Subconsciously, I could be sleeping or dreaming or walking, and things work out. Because I know I have once I have a specific nekuda, I can compartmentalize it and think about it. But when I'm just vague and confused, I don't even have anything to think about, right? So there is a chiluk between lack of specific clarity, we might call it, and lack of general clarity. One you can go on, and the other you got to work on until you get to some understanding of what it is that you don't know. Okay. So now we have Ais Ches. Again, a lot of these are short reflections. Masha Amru. There is a Maimer Chazal in Pirkei Avos. Kol sheyiras chetei kaidemes lechachmasei. Chachmasei miskayemes. Famous Maimer Chazal. If your yiras chet precedes your wisdom, meaning it's kind of the foundation of your wisdom, then your wisdom is going to remain. Right? Chazal say it in both ways. If it's yiras chetay, kaidemes l'chachmasay. Chachmasay miskayemes. V'im ein yirasay kaidemes l'chachmasay. Ein chachmasay miskayemes. So how does the Gemara explain this? I mean, l'chara, you might ask a question. Why is yiras chet a condition for the chachma of Torah to remain in me? Shouldn't the chachma of the Torah be like anything else? You know, you don't have to have yiras chet to be good in math. You don't have to have yiras chet to be good in science. You're smart enough. You're intelligent. You're intelligent enough. So you're bright enough. It's your IQ that's going to, let you know the knowledge. Why with Torah is there such a concept that in order for the chachma of Torah to remain in you, there has to be a yiras chet? So the Gra is masber like this. Ha'inyan, ki gisheyesh bo yiras chet, az hu mechapes b'limudai, leida es haderech yelech ba. So this is an interesting point. The Gra actually says it could be that you can understand, Shaklavataryas and Svaras even without yiras chet. You're smart enough, right? You can chap it. But without yiras chet, you will never be able to apply the Torah to how you should live. Because when I have yiras chet, what is yiras chet? Let's talk about that just for a moment. We say in Rosh Chodesh benching, it's going to be this Shabbos Mevorchet, we ask Hashem for a life in which you have yiras shamayim, v'yiras chet. Now, if you think about it, those are odd phrases. Fear of heaven, fear of God, and fear of sin. Now, obviously, the meaning of fear of sin is not the same type of fear as fear of God. I mean, God is not sin, So they do have two different meanings, even though they're both called yiras something. But the yira of yiras shamayim is not the same as the yira of yiras chet. Yiras shamayim, the Rishonim already say there are two types of yiras shamayim. There's a lower yiras shamayim and a higher yiras shamayim. The lower yiras shamayim is called yiras ha'onesh, in which I obey God because I am afraid of the consequences of not obeying God, punishments, Gehenna, everything else. Now, that is a low madrega, because you're not really acting because of Hashem, you're acting because, of punishment. And the Rambam says such a madrega is not the way a tzaddik thinks, but the Ramban points out we shouldn't diminish it, because if we had true yiras ha'onesh, we would never sin at all. So we shouldn't poo-poo yiras ha'onesh is, halvai that we should have yiras ha'onesh. But the real yiras shamayim is not yiras ha'onesh. It is what is called yiras haraimamus. And that is what we would call in English awe, reverence. Not fear of God. See, in English the word fear is not good. It is not fear of God. It is awe and reverence for his infinite greatness, power, and perfection. Now, awe and fear are not exactly the same. Even Bizman Hazeh, if you met Queen Elizabeth or now King Charles, whatever, you're not afraid. It's not like he's going to cut off your head if you don't bow down or something. But there's still a sense of awe. The king of England, or the President of the United States. President of Israel, I'm not sure of people, but even that, even President of Israel, even there's a certain notion of I feel a certain awe. That's why the Gemara says in Brachas that there's an inyan of greeting when kings, even non-Jewish kings, are coming through a town. You should go and greet them, because that'll give you a sense of awe, and then you can imagine in your head what it will be like when Mashiach comes. Like it's a little bit of a shadow of that. So Yiras HaReimamus is not, I'm afraid God will hurt me. That's Yiras HaOnesh. But it's the awe and the reverence I have for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's perfection and power, greatness. Now, Yiras Chet comes from Yiras HaReimamus. And the concept is this. Once I am totally taken over by this feeling of awe and reverence, I will then be afraid to do any Aveira. Not because I'm afraid I'll get punished, but how can I do something in the presence of the great, perfect, omnipotent, all-powerful HaKadosh Baruch Hu? How ashamed I would be. How humiliated I would be. So Yiras Chet comes from Yiras Shamayim. But the Maharal takes it even a little further. Yiras Chet can actually come from love of Hashem, not just fear of Hashem. Because when you love Hashem very intensely, you're afraid to do anything that will cause pain to the one that you love. Right? Let's say, imagine you have a husband and wife who are very close to each other. And the husband gets up early. Wife is still sleeping. Wife is a light sleeper. So the husband, we say, walks on eggshells, not to wake up his wife. He's afraid that his wife will wake up. Now, what is he afraid of? Is he afraid she's going to hit him on the head with the frying pan? Oh, once in a while there is that fear, but usually that's not the problem. It's not that I'm afraid she's going to hurt me, but rather, because of the love that one has, one is fearful to do anything that will be paigeia in that love. So Yiras Chet, the Maharal says, can actually come from Avas Hashem. It's an extreme Avas Hashem in which you're misyarei to do anything that will be paigeia in the one that you love. We see that in human relationships, and Kal v'chomer we see it by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Gra seems to be building on all of these ideas. And he says, when you learn Torah with Yiras Hashem, it's a different type of learning than when you learn Torah without Yiras Hashem. When I learn Torah without Yiras Hashem, so I'm doing it as an intellectual exercise. This thing and that debate goes back and forth, a discussion. But I'm not learning it because I want to live my life a certain way. In other words, if I'm doing Hashem's will or not, see, even if I'm if I'm not from for sure, it's not the case, but even if I'm from, if I don't have Yiras Shamayim, so I keep the mitzvahs, but I don't really, I'm not medayak in it so much. It doesn't make a big difference to me. So therefore the Gra says, you'll never understand the depth of Torah because you don't have the motivation to truly see how it applies to your life. Because you don't apply it to your life. You don't apply it. L'may nafkamina. When you have Yiras Shamayim, and when you learn Torah, you realize it is Hashem telling me how to live my life. I gotta pay attention. Everything becomes a life and death question. You see? So the Gra seems to say that the idea of Chachmasay Miskayemes isn't just a matter of do you remember it or whatever it is, but are you able to apply that Chachma to your life? And in order to apply that Chachma to your life, you have to have a feeling that the Torah is the guide to my life. And how do I get that feeling? That is what Yiras Shamayim gets me, because Yiras Shamayim says, I want to live my life in accordance with the will of Hashem. So when I'm learning, I'm asking, what is Hashem telling me to do? So then I'll notice all sorts of things that I otherwise wouldn't notice. You see? So that's the idea of chachmasay miskayemes. Now, it's hard for us because we don't always apply. I mean, we're learning Gittin, we're learning whatever it is. We're learning, how does it apply to me? Not that you should get divorced, right? We're not saying that. It's sometimes very hard to extract. And yet, you see, if you look at the great Bali Musar, right, they'll often take, Gemaras and Nashim, Nezikin, Gittin, Kedushin. They'll pull, not just the Agaditis for sure, but even in the Inyanim of Halacha, they'll pull out lessons because they're reading, every line they're reading to try to figure out, how can I serve Hashem through what this line is teaching me? How can I do it? How can I do it? And that's where Yiras Shamayim comes in, because Yiras Shamayim says, I'm learning the Torah because I want to know how to live a life of dedication to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, it's kind of, I squeeze every line for what hadracha it's giving me, what hayra it's giving me, what teaching it's giving me. Right? That's how he learns. Now, what's interesting is, in the Nefesh HaChaim, which of course is the Vilna Gaon's Talmud Muvak, Rav Chaim Volozhiner, Rav Chaim Volozhiner develops these ideas, exactly like the Gra says, but he also gives us a warning in the opposite direction. And again, a lot of Nefesh HaChaim, although he does not mention Hasidim, a lot of Nefesh HaChaim is a critique of Hasidus in a very gentle way. Rav Chaim Volozhiner was different than the Gra, stylistically at least. The Gra, kind of no holes barred, he just put Hasidus and Cherem and everything else. Rav Chaim Volozhiner was very gentle. He did not use harsh words or denunciations, but indirectly he criticizes certain things. And he said that there are people who learn Torah in order to get Devekus B'Hashem. Sounds good. Sounds very good. But because their whole focus is on Devekus B'Hashem, they sometimes don't really spend time in the depth of a sugya. For example, let's imagine that you learn Torah because you want to become a spiritual person, right? In fact, this is a problem that people who come to our Sameach sometimes face from their beginning. They figure that the Talmud has, the meaning of life. The Talmud tells us why we were created. The Talmud says how we become close to God. And I want to learn that. I want to learn the wisdom of how to become close to God. So a person comes to his first Gemara share, and it's opened up, and there's a discussion about a person who brings a get from Medina Sayyam, or what is the halacha if an egg is laid, a chicken lays an egg on Yom Tov, or two people come into a beis din holding a talis. And, it's interesting intellectually, all sorts of arguments. But think about this. This person didn't come because he wanted to go to law school. He could have gone to law school and, have similar types of discussions, lahavdil. He comes because he's looking for Hashem. He wants spirituality. He wants meaning of life. How do you get that? So Rav Chaim Volozhiner says, this is the danger of an over-concentration on Devekus. Because when you over-concentrate on Devekus, you're not going to have the patience to go through a Tosfos and a Ramban and a Rebbe Kiva Eger, because you're not going to see how that connects you to Hashem. L'maisa it does, because you're feeding your neshama. But rationally, you can't explain it. Right? If somebody were to ask you or ask me, how is learning Shnai Mochs and Betalis make me a better person? It's very hard to give a logical answer. The answer is a metaphysical answer. It's a spiritual answer. It just does. Because it connects you to Hashem, and the Torah is the same as Hashem, and therefore, when you connect to the Torah, you're connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore, your neshama gets elevated. Yeah. But in terms of direct cause and effect, how is this connected? So because of this, Rav Chaim Volozhiner actually said, when you learn Torah, you should not be thinking directly about connecting to Hashem. You should be thinking only of the Torah itself In other words, Torah l'shem Torah. Dveikus is a goal. Dveikus is a goal, is the goal, is the goal. But it should not be a conscious striving for Dveikus. You see the chiluk here. Because when you consciously strive for Dveikus, lehepech, then you're not going to get it because you're going to shortchange the kayach of Torah. You see? Now, Rav Chaim then says, though, a very fascinating point. This is really a gewaldige point. He says that there is a pasuk that says, Yiras Hashem hi oitzarai. Yiras Hashem is the treasure house. And in fact, this is the source. This is the Bir Hagra in Pirkei Avos, which for some reason is not quoted here. It's a logical quote. Says that every pasuk, every Mishnah in Pirkei Avos can be sourced in a pasuk in Tanakh, even though the Mishnah doesn't quote the pasuk. And on the Mishnah, Kol sheyiras chetay kedemes l'chachmasay, chachmasay miskayemes, is from the pasuk, Yiras Hashem is the storehouse. Yiras Hashem hi oitzarai, that the same way without a storehouse, the grain is going to be stolen or rot. So without Yiras Hashem, your Torah is going to rot. Right? And that's the makor, that's the pasuk, that's the makor for Kol sheyiras chetay kedemes l'chachmasay, chachmasay miskayemes. You see? So now Rav Chaim Volozhiner says the following. So we see that Yiras Chet is the warehouse, Yiras Chet is the storehouse, but Torah is the grain. Torah is the grain. Yiras Chet is the oitzer that preserves the grain. So says Rav Chaim Volozhiner, Yiras Chet is a preservative. So the halacha says like this: when I sell you grain by weight, let's say I agree to sell you 100 pounds of wheat. So in the time of Chazal, a certain amount of that was dirt, because apparently the dirt from which the wheat grew, was a natural preservative of the grain. So it was understood that when I sold you wheat, I included the dirt. So how much of the 100 pounds can be dirt? Right? You agree to have 100 pounds of wheat, a certain amount of that can be dirt as preservative. So the Mishnah makes a cheshbon, you can have up to 1/24 of it to be dirt. So let's make the math simple. If I have a contract for 24 pounds, you can give me 23 pounds of grain and 1 pound of dirt. 124. 124 there. 1/24 of the whole can be dirt. So says Rav Chaim Volozhiner, if Yiras Chet is called the preservative, that means, and the Torah is called the grain, the same way the ratio of preservative to grain is 1/24, the ratio of the time you should spend on Yiras Chet and Musar and Dveikus should be 1/24 of your total learning time. I believe that this is the makor of the minhag of a half an hour Musar Seder. Because if you look at a yeshiva schedule to be 12 hours, in Europe it was a 12-hour schedule, so a half an hour is 1/24. And that's the exact idea, that becomes Yiras Hashem, hi oitzarai. Yiras Hashem is the preservative of the wheat, you see? And that's why he warned that you need that dveikus. You need that dveikus, or the chachma is not miskayemes. But the learning itself should be l'shem Torah. You shouldn't consciously be thinking about dveikus, because then you'll go crazy by always asking yourself, well, how is this, you're sitting with your chavrusa looking at a Rebbe Kiva Eger. Says, how is this bringing me closer to Hashem? At some point you get lost in it. And then you're kind of lost in space. And you can't get down to what you need to get down. That's why they say, it's kind of funny, that the Nefesh HaChaim was not learnt in the Volozhiner Yeshiva, because they didn't want to take time off a Musar Sefer, whatever it would be. Rav Chaim Volozhin's own Sefer was not studied in Volozhin for that reason. Volozhin B'chlal. In fact, it's interesting. I mean, it's hard to understand this because the way Volozhin developed, it seems not to have followed the Nefesh HaChaim Legamri. Because the Nefesh HaChaim did say there has to be time for Musar, there has to be time for Devekas, albeit in a relatively small proportion. But as Volozhin developed, it became totally learning. They did not have any type of Musar in Volozhin, really. And the Brisker Rav, the Brisker Rav grew up. Volozhin was closed when the Brisker Rav was around 12. The Russian government closed Volozhin because the Brisker Rav's father, Rav Chaim, was the junior Rosh Yeshiva with the Netziv over Volozhin. The Netziv was the senior Rosh Yeshiva. He had been Rosh Yeshiva for 50 years. And the last 12 years, Rav Chaim Soloveitchik was the Rosh Yeshiva. Imagine the Netziv, Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. It's so fascinating. Each of them had a shir, but it was the same shir. Very, very, very strange. I don't think there's any yeshiva that ever operated that way. I don't remember the exact dates, but it was something like, they alternated days. So Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, the Netziv, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Rav Chaim, and each one had to continue where the other one left off. So whatever the Netziv did, Rav Chaim had to go, from that point on. Now you could imagine that the Netziv and Rav Chaim had very, very different learning derachim. The Netziv was mavil, was amazing in his Bekiyas in everything. Not just Shas, Bekiyas in Yerushalmi, Tosefta. Every Medrash. Zohar, everything. So the Netziv's Eon Shir, his Eon Shir, consisted of bringing in a lot of different Mara Makomos. The way we understand Taisvus is by the Tosefta in Machshirin, whatever it would be. The Netziv knew everything. Rav Chaim Shir was very different. Rav Chaim Shir B'dafka emphasized Svara. So Rav Chaim didn't bring in a lot. Rav Chaim would typically take a Rambam and a Ravid and just go through the deep understanding of the Svaras. And Rav Chaim did not bring in a lot of other things other than, Rambam, Ravid, Taisus. That's all. In fact, even other Rishonim were often not brought in. He knew them. I'm sure, of course, he knew them, but he did not. You're not going to see in Rav Chaim Ramban and Rashba and Ritva and Ran. Rav Chaim is basically, Rashi, Tosfos, Rambam, and Ravid is the whole business. Everything is based on that, and even Taisus is not mentioned that much. It's mainly Rambam and Ravid. So you can understand that in Volozhin, everybody in Volozhin was like an Eloi. They didn't have regular people in Volozhin. But some Talmidim gravitated very much to the Netziv's derech, but they didn't like Rav Chaim's derech. They thought it was too kvetchy. And others the other way around. They thought Rav Chaim was so amazing, but they didn't like the Netziv. He's just bringing in stuff and the like. So some people only went to one shir and not the other shir. Some people went to Rav Chaim and not the Netziv. Some people went to the Netziv and not Rav Chaim. And amazingly enough, some people didn't go to shir. I mean, can you imagine this? That's why, I don't feel bad anymore. Someone doesn't go to my shir. Well, so what's the big deal? The Rav Chaim and the Netziv. People figured, I'd rather learn by myself, right? That's what it was, People didn't go to the shir. So you can have, Moshe Rabbeinu giving a shir, kind of repeats himself too much, whatever it would be. But the thing was that Volozhin didn't really have Musar, even though the Harav of Chaim called for it. And when Volozhin was closed, and the next generation of yeshivas were Mir, Slobodka. When I say next generation, I don't really mean next generation because Mir was founded very early, but they didn't become dominant. When Volozhin was around, Volozhin was the king of yeshivas. And all the other yeshivas were tafel to Volozhin. So Mir and Slobodka became like great mostos only after Volozhin was closed. And they were Musar yeshivas. They were Musar yeshivas that were very, the Alter of Slobodka, etc., Rav Yerucham and Mir. they became great meisters of Musar. And the Brisker Rav is said to have remarked that maybe it was Min HaShamayim that Volozhin was closed down because Klal Yisrael needed Musar and Midos, because otherwise people went off the derech. I mean, they were intellectually brilliant, but they didn't have the Midos of Musar and the like. So why Volozhin abandoned the Shita of Musar, it's not so clear. But Rav Chaim Volozhiner, who was a proponent of Musar, at the same time emphasized that this concentration on Yiras Hashem should only be part of the time. Most of the time, you're just focusing on the sugya. So it's an interesting point. On one hand, the Vilna Gaon says here that it's Yiras Hashem that makes me, or Yiras Chet, that makes me focus on how the Torah is guiding my life. And that's why I'm going to see all sorts of things in the Torah that I otherwise wouldn't see. Because it applies to my life. It's not just a thing. It's not just a nice word. It's telling me how to live. So I'm going to notice all sorts of things. On the other hand, the Yiras Chet has to be in the background, meaning it's not a conscious thing that you're thinking about. Okay, so it's a little complicated to navigate all of those cheshbainis. But that's what he says. Okay. Yep. Now we have Ice Tess. Kishalomed Eitzel Rav. When you're learning with a Rebbe, Al Yomer Lefanav Chidushay Teirasai Lispar Lefanav Rak Yira Lakablo Mimenu Teira Kamosha Kasav Vesatsunuim Chachma. This is really a commentary on a pasuk in Mishlei. The pasuk in Mishlei says, Vies Hatsnuim Chachma. With the modest ones, tznius, those who cover themselves up. With the tzenuim, there is chachma, those who cover themselves up. Now, this is not referring to how you dress, or how women dress, or men dress, but rather the Gra interprets the pasuk very interestingly. Sometimes, a person just wants to say his chidushim. Even just Rebbe, he wants to say, this is how I learn, and he wants the Rebbe to approve it, the Rebbe to listen to it, etc. So the Vilna Gaon says, when a Talmud is learning with the Rebbe, the Talmud should not make a point of always taking time to say over his chidushim. It's more important that he tries to be makabel from the person who's greater than him. And then that's where he's going to learn. Meaning, as I say, we all learn when we listen more than when we talk. I feel a little guilty since I'm talking, but the emes is it's true for everybody. When we listen, we learn. When we talk, we're just saying what we kind of already know. And the Gra says a Talmud has to be careful not to be marich in wanting to tell the Rebbe his chidushim. Now, does that mean a Talmud cannot bring up something? Well, it depends. If a Talmud wants to know if he's thinking in the right direction, so you say, then sure, you tell your Rebbe, this is what I think. Is this emes? Is this right? Is there a mistake? That's part of how you learn. But stop, you just want to tell your chidushim. With the Brisker Rav, didn't like people to tell him chidushay Torah. When people would tell him, because usually it wasn't up to his standard of excellence. So he once said, he says, listen, if somebody asks me for pshat, what's pshat in something? I have a chiyuv to teach Torah. There's a mitzvah to teach Torah. So even if it cuts into my learning, that's my chiyuv. My chiyuv is to be malamed Torah. But if somebody just wants to tell me their Torah, why am I mechayev to stop learning for that reason? I mean, and for me, it's bittul Torah. I could say, well, this is bittul Torah for me. It says I'm not mechayev to listen to what some other guy wants to say. I'm mechayev to answer the question that the other person has. Again, not comparing myself to Brisker at all, but I see this in my email correspondence. I spend most of the day on email. It's really, I have to figure out some way out of this. But there are different types of things. Sometimes people ask questions, and sometimes it's kind of just an opinion. They have a different opinion than me, and they want me to know their opinion. Now they have the right. They have the right to have their opinion. But why do I have to? I mean, the mice I engage in it because they ask me. But it's not really a question. It's like they'll tell me their whole opinion. What do you think? Okay, it's like they just put a question mark at the end of a speech. And the emes is, okay, you have your opinion. That's fine. I have my opinion. You have your opinion. I'm not mechuyev necessarily to be metapel with everybody's opinion about everything. And that's what the Gemara says, that Talmidim especially should not feel that the Rebbe should be, just for their chidushim and the like. And that's the meaning of the pasuk, Es hatznuim chachma. Chachma remains with those who are b'tznius. Now, of course, with the Bali Musar, there was even a higher madrega, which he's not addressing here. The Bali Musar had a thing that they never wanted to be miskoya in their learning. So even when they were Talmidei Chachamim, talking Talmidei Chachamim, they would often sit as if they didn't know what was going on. They tell a Maisa with Rav Yitzchak Peterburger. He's Rav Yitzchak Blazer. He was the Rav of Petersburg. He was Rav Yisrael Salanter's, one of Rav Yisrael Salanter's primary Talmidim. A great Baal Musar, but also a great Talmid Chacham. He has Shelos Utshuvas pre-Yitzchak. Very, very lamdasha. Shelos Utshuvas. And he was once sitting, he was the Rav of Petersburg, which was the capital of Tsarist Russia. It was a very important city. So many Rabbanim came, and they were talking and learning, and they were mafalpel in a complicated shaila, and Rav Yitzchak was just sitting. He didn't say a word. And it almost looked like he wasn't even following it. So finally, one of the Rabbanim says, what does Rav Yitzchak say about this? Rav Yitzchak says, I don't really understand the sugya that well, so I have nothing to say. They found later that in the pre-Yitzchak itself, there was a whole tshuva devoted to that exact shaila, in which every point that everybody made was in there, and plus a lot more was in there as well. But he didn't want to be miskaya. He says, why do I have to show off? Whatever. Okay. So that's already a higher madrega. The Gra is talking about a Talmud not doing it to a Rebbe, but among the Bali Musar it was even among Talmidei Chachamim. They say Rabbi Binyamin Finkel, who had been Rosh Hashiva of Mir, he didn't like anyone to even see him learn. Whatever, he had a cheshbon. So they say that if he would get up 2 o'clock in the morning to learn, he always had a newspaper next to the Gemara. So if anybody came into the kitchen, he covered the Gemara with a newspaper and said, I couldn't sleep, so I came to read the paper. Whatever, he had a certain, he was Rosh Hashiva of Mir. He had a certain anivas, but he didn't want to, he didn't want to behave like a Rosh Hashiva. In fact, when he gave a shir kolali, when he came to give a shir, and some guys were walking out, he would say, "It's good to walk out. You're not going to hear anything that great today." He said, no, this was his mahalach. And when he was nifter, so there were a bunch of women, the women who begged for money at the kaisel, they were like crying and sobbing. They didn't know he was a Rosh Hashiva. He used to go, he used to give money, he used to buy them food. They just saw him as a guy who was just a very, very nice person to them. And there was like no hasaga that he was a Rosh Hashiva Bichlal. Very, very amazing how a person could be Rosh Hashiva of Mir. Now Mir was much smaller then, but still, a Rosh Hashiva of a great yeshiva, and mamish, he was mamish totally a nister. And so many madregas. In fact, he was the son of Rav Lezer Yodelfinkel, who was the great Rosh Hashiva of Mir in Europe and the first Rosh Hashiva here in Eretz Israel. And Rav Lezer Yodel, in fact, his son refused to take a salary for many years. Rav Lezer Yodel ordered him to take a salary. He says, you have to take money, those are your achrayas, etc. But after Kedekach, he didn't want to get paid for the yeshiva. And it's not like he had some other parnasa. I mean, he had no parnasa, but he said he didn't need the money, whatever. So these are madregas that are really beyond what we would expect as normal. But the Gra, at least, is talking about the union of tznius with chachma. Okay, let's just begin the next one. I'm sorry, what time Harav is? What time? Okay, maybe we'll stop. Okay. All right, have a good Shabbos.